Welcome to Biology 160, Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology. We're going to be talking about the urinary system. This is one of the last systems that we're going to talk about in the body. And let's begin by talking about the functions of the urinary system. The first thing that comes to mind, my mind and probably your mind as well when you think of the urinary system, is urine, which is basically a waste product, or mainly a waste product, that's being excreted from the body. And that is one of the main functions of the urinary system, is the elimination of waste products. So as our body is metabolizing, as we're ingesting things and processing them, we end up with waste products we have to get rid of, specifically nitrogenous wastes, then also some toxins and drugs that our body wants to eliminate, and that they're taken from the blood and they're excreted through the urinary system. There's another major function of the urinary system, and this one you may not think as much about, but the urinary system is involved very much in maintaining homeostasis in the body. So just in case you don't remember homeostasis, a little bit of review, this is basically a balance. Our body has to maintain homeostasis, has to maintain a certain balance in a lot of different ways in order to stay alive and be a living thing. The urinary system helps maintain homeostasis in the following functions in the body. Water balance. So making sure that the amount of water we're taking in, the amount of water we're releasing is balanced so that we have the water that we need inside the body. Also electrolytes. These are things like ions, potassium, sodium, anything that has a charge are going to be our electrolytes. And then also the acid-base balance of the blood. We've mentioned before how the blood has a very specific pH that it has to maintain, and so the urinary system is what helps it maintain that acid-base balance that it needs. Blood pressure is also controlled by the urinary system, and this is controlled by a hormone that is released, and then also the red blood cell production as well. The blood pressure hormone is called renin, and this is different than the renin that we saw in the digestive system that helps digest milk. This is a hormone that is released by the kidneys into the bloodstream that helps maintain blood pressure. Red blood cell production is controlled by erythropoietin, which we talked a little bit about when we talked about the endocrine system. This is also released by the kidneys, which stimulates the production of erythrocytes, or red blood cells. And then also the activation of vitamin D. So to put in its fully functional form, you need the urinary system. So this has a lot of functions. The urinary system, or the kidney, is mainly an organ of homeostasis, but it's also able to remove some waste from the body. So let's look at where the kidneys are located in the body. The urinary system is a pretty simple system. There's not very many parts to it. First of all, we have our kidneys, which you're familiar with. Here's our kidneys. These kidneys empty into a tube called a ureter, and then those empty into the urinary bladder. And from there we have what's called the urethra, which is a tube that connects with the outside and allows the urine to be released or excreted out of the body. So we go kidneys, ureters, urinary bladder, urethra. You can see the other organs, how it's kind of associated with the other organs in the abdomen. You can see how it's the aorta and the vena cava coming by the kidneys, and that is because the blood supply, and you can see the aorta branching off and moving right into the kidneys. That's because the blood supply is very important. So the circulatory system is closely associated with the urinary system because the kidneys filter the blood, and so the blood is going through these kidneys. And you can see the rectum, the large intestine, is associated. It's not part of the urinary system, but the digestive system is going to be located in this abdominal region here. And then we're going to have the diaphragm up above and the thoracic cavity. So that's where the kidneys are found. They're a little bit higher than probably you think. So when a lot of times someone will get hit in the lower back in this area here, and they'll call it a kidney shot. So right below the ribs, can be a painful place to be punched. But your kidneys are actually higher up than that. Your kidneys are enclosed by the very lower part of the rib cage, so the 12th rib, the 11th and 12th rib here. So they're a little bit higher than you might think. So the vertebrae wise, they're at the end, just at the end of the thoracic vertebrae to the beginning of the lumbar vertebrae, so T12 to L3. And so they are protected, at least somewhat, by the rib cage. Another interesting thing is that the right kidney, which would be on this side, so it'd be your right, so thinking on your right side, the right kidney is going to be a little bit lower than the left kidney. And that is because the liver is going to be located in this area here, and so that's going to take up some of that room, so the kidney is going to be a little bit lower in that area. There's a number of coverings that protect and surround the kidney. The first one is called the fibrous capsule, and this surrounds each kidney. There's also the pararenal fat capsule, which also surrounds the kidney. And this is actually a layer of fat, and it protects the kidney from getting hit and keeps it from getting hurt in that way. And then the very outermost layer of the coverings of the kidney is the fascia, and this is a capsule that holds the kidney in place against the trunk wall, so holds it up where it needs to be. Because of how the kidneys are positioned and how they're associated with the urethra, the ureters, if anything happens to this fat cushion, it can actually cause the kidneys to fall a little bit. So surrounded by fat, and then the renal fascia is holding it in place. But if that fatty tissue is removed, then the kidneys can actually fall a little bit. So how this could happen is if someone loses weight, a lot of weight really quickly, you can lose that fat that's around the kidneys. If these kidneys fall, it can actually put a kink in the ureters, and which means that the urine's not going to be able to flow out of the kidneys and down the ureters, and cause a backup of urine in the kidneys, and can, if it's really bad, can cause them to fail. And so it's important not to lose that fat. So that fat around the kidney is important. One other thing about the location of the kidneys, and we've talked about these little organs before, these are the adrenal glands, which are located on the top of each of the kidneys, and they're associated with the endocrine system, not the urinary system, but that is where they're located as well. If you were to cut open a kidney, you will find that there's three main sections of the kidney. There's the renal cortex, the renal medulla, and the renal pelvis. Cortex, medulla, pelvis. And that is going in order from outside to in. So in this picture here, you can see the renal cortex is this outer layer of tissue in the kidneys. So in this area here. If you look at a dissected kidney, it's pretty easy to see the cortex. So the cortex, here's a dissected kidney, and you can see this cortex is going to be this area here, kind of this greenish gray tissue on the outside of the kidney. Underneath that, we have what's called the renal medulla area. And in this picture of the kidney, the renal medulla, let's see, so here's the cortex. The renal medulla is going to go from here to here. That's going to be the renal medulla. It's also called the renal pyramids, because in this renal medulla area, we have these almost pyramid-shaped sections of kidney that are important in the filtration function of the kidney, filtering the blood. And the base of the pyramid is pointed towards the cortex, and the apex is going to be pointed towards the medial side of the kidney, toward the center of the body. And then we have the renal pelvis, which is the last part of the kidney, and it's an open space inside the kidney that is one with the ureter. So the renal pelvis becomes the ureter. And you can see it again on this cross-section of a kidney. So here's our renal pyramids, our renal medulla. and then here's going to be the renal pelvis that is going to empty into the ureter and then move down towards the urinary bladder. We're going to look at in this lecture series, we're going to learn about the functions of the different parts of the kidneys and what's happening here. I do want to point out a couple more things here. Here's the artery coming in, and here's the renal artery coming in and the renal vein coming out, which is going to empty into the vena cava, and this comes directly from the aorta. A couple other things to point out here are the renal columns, and the renal columns are the tissue in between the renal pyramids. So here's a pyramid here, here's a pyramid here, and the column is going to be this area in between the two pyramids, in each of the pyramids. There's also things called calyxes, C-E-S, or the singular is going to be calyx, but the plural is calyces. And the calyx is a cup-shaped organ or section that dumps into the renal pyramid. So it into the renal, man, I'm getting all these words mixed up here. Anyway, into the renal pelvis. So the renal pyramids funnel into the calyx, which then go into the renal pelvis and on into the ureter. And those are the parts of the kidney. Last of all, I want to mention how the blood flows through the kidneys. So there's a number of blood vessels here associated with the kidneys. There's always a lot of blood flowing through the kidneys. 1/4 of the total blood supply of the body passes through the kidneys each minute. That's huge. So every day, you're filtering all of your blood multiple times. And so it's keeping it nice and clean. And so the kidneys are really good at what they do. And they keep our blood nice and clean, help us maintain homeostasis. We don't always recognize how important the kidneys are and how well they function until something goes wrong. And then suddenly you realize how much you rely on the kidneys to do their job. Someone that no longer has kidney function has to go in for dialysis treatment. They have to go in 2 or 3 times a week, and they have to sit in this chair and have their blood pass through this machine for a number of hours during those times. So we're really lucky to have functional kidneys where we don't have to go in and do that. That just does it constantly all day. We don't really have to do anything to make it happen. So the blood supply starts in the aorta, and then it moves into the renal arteries, which we've already seen. From there, it moves into smaller arteries called the segmental arteries, and from there into interlobar arteries, and then to arcuate arteries, cortical radiate arteries. And then this section here is very important. We're going to focus on this section as we're talking about the urinary system, because we have what's called the afferent arterioles, the efferent arterioles, and we have two sets of capillaries, glomerulus and also peritubular capillaries. So this is another situation where we're going from arterial vessels to capillaries, back to arterial vesicles, and then to capillaries again. So we have this 2 capillary systems, one right after the other, before we get into the venous side of the blood. And so this is where we're going to focus on the filtration function of the kidneys. And then from there, notice how the veins basically mimic the arteries, except that there aren't any segmental veins, but you have cortical veins, arcuate veins, interlobar veins, renal veins, and then back into the inferior vena cava. If we come back to this picture here, let's erase a couple things so we can see the blood vessels now in here. But what we have going on here is, so here's the renal artery, then it's going to branch off, and then we're going to have the segmental arteries, and then from there, so it's segmenting off here, and then you have what are called the interlobar arteries as it segments again, and then you have the arcuate, which are going to branch around, and then are going to come into and become the cortical radiate arteries. So the cortical is talking about the cortex, and so the cortical arteries are in the cortex region here. And then from there, it doesn't show the afferent or the efferent arterioles or the glomerulus. We'll look at those when we look at the microscopic anatomy of the kidneys. And then it comes back into the cortical radiate arteries, which are going to dump into the arcuate arteries, and then into interlobar, and then into the renal vein, and then back into the vena cava. And so that's the blood flow through the kidney. Last of all, in this section here, let's look at a little video here that shows an overview of the urinary system that we've already looked at. So here is a human. Drawing of a human. You can see where the urinary system parts of the urinary system are located. Here we have our kidney, and this is our ureter coming off of the kidney. Here inside the kidney, now you can see how urine is produced. So urine is produced from the outer, moving towards the inner. And this we call, and I didn't mention this before, this is the hilum. And the kidney is a bean-shaped organ. It's about 6 inches tall, an inch thick, and maybe 2.5 inches wide, 3 inches wide. And it has this hilum, which is this part that comes in here. And so the kidneys dump into the ureters, which come down to the urinary bladder. So let's back that up just a little bit there. Which come into urinary bladder and then into the urethra. Notice in the male anatomy, the urethra is very long. In the females, the urethra is very short. And you probably already know that already, but anyway, just kind of point that out there. Here we have the blood supply. We have the aorta coming directly from the heart, and then it's branching off into the renal artery. So one of the first places the blood goes is into the kidney, and you can see the cortex here, this outer region, and then the medulla, which is the pyramids, and then the renal pelvis, which then dump into, this will be the calyx, which will dump into the renal pelvis, which will then become the ureter and move down towards the urinary bladder. So that is the structural anatomy of the urinary system. And that is where we'll end this section of the lecture.